St. Victoria's Hospital had long been a relic of the past. Built in the early 1900s, it had weathered decades of tragedies, pandemics, and forgotten patients. By the 1980s, it had been abandoned, left to decay on the outskirts of town. However, a small team of medical researchers had recently acquired the building to set up a private, off-the-books clinic for experimental treatments. Dr. Amelia Grant, a brilliant surgeon, was leading the team. She had an obsession with uncovering a cure for a rare neurological disease that had taken her sister years ago. Despite rumors of strange occurrences at St. Victoria's, Dr. Grant and her team dismissed them as urban legends. But the hospital held dark secrets. Chapter 1: Unseen Shadows. From the first night, things began to go wrong. The team had set up their base in the hospital's old operating wing. It was cold, damp, and filled with the sounds of dripping pipes and distant echoes. One evening, while reviewing patient charts, Amelia noticed something odd. A file on her desk, one she had never seen before, patient 502. Confused, she opened it. The file contained detailed notes on a patient who had been admitted to St. Victoria's in 1953 for a lobotomy. There was no explanation for how this file had ended up in her stack, and when she asked the other doctors, none of them had any idea either. But the file stuck with her, particularly a note at the end: patient died during the procedure. Cause unexplained. Chapter 2: Whispers in the Dark. The next few nights, the hospital came alive in ways none of the doctors could explain. Dr. Marcus, one of Amelia's colleagues, began hearing whispers during his night shifts. At first they were faint, a woman's voice calling his name softly from the corners of the long, dark corridors. He assumed it was the wind or his mind playing tricks, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They started calling out warnings, pleading for help. One evening, while making rounds, Marcus caught a glimpse of someone moving at the end of a hallway. The figure was dressed in a hospital gown, head bandaged, and it seemed to float rather than walk. He followed, heart pounding, convinced it was a hallucination. But as he turned the corner, the figure vanished, leaving behind only a sharp, cold gust of wind. Chapter 3: Descent into Madness. Amelia and her team were skeptical of Marcus's experiences until others started seeing the figure as well. Nurses reported patients disappearing from their beds, only to reappear hours later in different rooms, terrified and babbling about the doctor with the empty eyes. Medical equipment malfunctioned for no reason, and the hospital's lights flickered like a heartbeat, growing more erratic each night. By now, Amelia was growing frantic. The experiments were failing, her team was on edge, and the strange occurrences were becoming impossible to ignore. One night, Amelia woke in a cold sweat, hearing the unmistakable sound of surgical tools clattering to the floor. She followed the sound to the old operating theater, a place none of the team had dared to go. There, she found the room untouched since its last use in the 1950s. The operating table was stained with dried blood, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. In the corner, a shadowy figure stood motionless, facing away from her. Its head was bandaged, just like in Marcus's vision. Amelia's breath caught as the figure slowly turned toward her. Its face was a hollow void, black, endless, and terrifying. It whispered in a voice that chilled her to her core: "You've come back to finish what you started." Chapter 4: The Truth Unveiled. Desperate for answers, Amelia dug deeper into the hospital's history. She discovered that St. Victoria's had once been a site for illegal medical experiments during the 1950s. Dozens of patients were subjected to inhumane procedures, most of whom died. The worst of them had been a series of botched lobotomies, carried out by a Dr. Howard Blackwell, a surgeon notorious for his cold detachment and obsession with perfection. Blackwell disappeared without a trace after his final patient, patient 502, died on his table. The realization hit Amelia like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just haunted by the hospital's past, she was entangled in it. The experiments her team was conducting had somehow stirred the vengeful spirits of those forgotten patients. And worse, Dr. Blackwell's spirit still roamed the hospital, seeking to continue his work through her. Chapter 5: The Horrifying End. One night, Amelia awoke to find herself strapped to the operating table in the old theater, unable to move. Around her, her colleagues stood frozen, eyes wide with terror but unable to intervene. The shadowy figure of Dr. Blackwell loomed above her, surgical tools in hand, his hollow eyes gleaming with anticipation. She struggled to scream, but no sound came out. The ghostly surgeon moved closer, whispering in that same chilling voice, "It's time for the final procedure." The last thing Amelia saw was the scalpel descending toward her forehead. When authorities finally arrived days later, the hospital was in shambles. The team had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only blood-stained floors and scattered surgical tools. St. Victoria's Hospital was sealed off once again, its haunted halls left to rot. But locals say if you pass by at night, you can still hear the echoes of surgical tools clattering and the faint whispers of a long-dead doctor continuing his work.